Welcome to the early refactoring video in the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to take our first pass at refactoring some of the more glaring issues in our application. Now, normally, you don't do a major refactoring this early, and this won't be a major refactoring either today. But it is a good time to fix small things that can become bigger issues down the road. Now, if you're a Patreon supporter at the $5 per month level or higher, make sure you head over to get the latest source code. But either way, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can follow along. And finally, as you think of suggestions, please leave them down in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts on this course. This entire video today is based upon your suggestions. There's some great ones here. So let's get started right away in refactoring our application. Now, I've got open the project. We don't have any changes locally, and if we go to sync and do fetch, there's no changes on the server. So we can get started right away with our refactoring. Now, like I said, all these changes came from discussions with you. Now, I didn't attach names to each of these, so if you notice your suggestion but I don't call you out, that's just because there's so many people making suggestions, I can't keep track of it all. And really, there's been more than one person saying, why didn't you do this? And I say, well, duh, I just didn't think of it. So we're going to go ahead and make some of those tweaks and suggestions. The first one is in our tables. Let's just open up inventory. We have like product ID, but 0 foreign keys. And product ID comes from the product table. Well, let's go ahead and fix that. So let's add some foreign keys where necessary. So the inventory table, I'm going to right click on foreign key and say add new foreign key. And we'll say to product. And sometimes you don't put a to in there, you just put product. So F key underscore inventory underscore product. The problem with that I find sometimes is I get confused which one's the foreign key table, which one is the primary key table. So this way it's just a little more clear that inventory is where the foreign key lives and product is where the primary key lives. Now what I do is I jump down here to our T-SQL editor to make the change. So the foreign key column is the column in this table, product ID. And then we're going to table column. So table is going to be product table, and the column is going to be the, I believe, ID. Let's just make sure of that. Yep. So this is a naming convention thing. I want to make sure, but at the same time, it's good naming convention to name our primary keys in every table ID, even though you have multiple then IDs, which mean different things, but you're always in the context of a table. So product.id is the ID for products, whereas inventory.id is the ID for inventory items. So when you refer to it as a foreign key, it's very easy to understand where that's going to. Product ID is going to the product table to that ID column. So I wire that up. There's a foreign key set up. I can save that. I don't have any that would be a foreign key relationship in the product table. Let's look at sales. Sales has cashier ID, but that's the user ID over here. So let's go ahead and wire this up as a foreign key. So add foreign key and to the user table. Let's spell it right. To user. And let's rename this to be cashier ID. Make sure you spell it right. And to table is going to be the user table. And the ID is going to be the just ID. Now it's yelling at me because user is actually a reserved word. So I'll put my square brackets back in. So if you have a reserved word, there's a few of them that you'll stumble across, and user is one of them, where you want to use what is very clearly identifying what you think it should be. User table makes sense, but that's a reserved word in SQL. And so you have a problem where it says, okay, you can't use that keyword here because it thinks it's primarily a keyword. But if you put it in square brackets, like I did right here, then you're saying, no, it's not a reserved word. It's not one of those, it's not a thing to act upon, like, money or int or primary, those kind of things. But instead, this is a table name or object name of some kind. Ideally, you don't name things with reserved words, but sometimes you just feel like you can't help it. And this is one of those cases where this is the user table. It just makes sense to call it user, but it's going to cause you problems. So that's how we fix it, is a square brackets. Okay, so that wires up the foreign key for cashier ID. Notice that a couple things. First of all, cashier ID is not user ID. I didn't call it user ID. And the reason why I didn't is because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to call it user ID, because then I don't know what user is that. So when it comes to the sale, I don't know, is that the user who bought it? Is that the user who checked the person out? Is that the user who was the manager at the time? We don't know. Whereas this cashier ID makes it very, very clear who this is. Now, yes, that does obfuscate a little bit who then the cashier is, meaning is that a user ID or is that a some other kind of ID? But hopefully it makes sense by context, and otherwise you need to document that in some way to say, okay, this is what this is. Now, I just documented it by setting up a relationship, which makes that very clear what that is. Also note this is a nvarchar 128. I've gotten some questions about this because the user ID is not an int, it's an nvarchar 128, which is not typically what we use for our primary keys on tables. And the reason why not is because it makes it really messy to store that. It also makes it very messy to reference that. We have this large string. Well, what we're doing, though, is we're bringing this ID over from whoever's logged in. And that is an nvarchar 128 value. So instead of then translating that to another number and then using that number everywhere, we're using this nvarchar 128 value. What that allows us to do is not have to do an extra database call every single time we want to talk about this user. Because in our desktop UI, when we say, okay, here's my token, the API says, oh, that's this nvarchar 128 value. So I can just put that right into the cashier ID table. I don't have to do any lookups. Whereas if I try to make it cleaner by saying, well, this is actually an integer and we have the login ID or something like that down below, and that's the nvarchar 128, when I went to make a sale, I couldn't just insert this record. I'd have to go first to the user table, look up by that nvarchar 128, find the value of the ID, which would be an integer, then come over and do the insert. I have to do that for every single transaction, whether it be a sale, whether it be a inventory adjustment or anything else. And that's just a lot of overhead for not a lot of value. So this is one of those cases where the best practice doesn't really apply or doesn't mean you're forced to do it the way the best practice says. So I'm not going to do the way best practice says because this is a unique or a unique situation, uncommon situation. Okay, so we've gone through a sales table and the inventory table. Sales detail table has sale ID and product ID. So let's add a foreign key first for the sales ID. So this is the sale table. So this is going to be the sale ID, and the table here is the sale table, and the column is going to be ID. And we'll add one more for the product ID. So this is going to go to the product table. And this is going to be the product ID foreign key to the product table and the ID column. And there we go, it's all validated. Lastly, the user doesn't have any relationships, therefore we're good to go right there. So now we've updated 3 tables with foreign keys. So now I can double click on our publish and say publish, and it will publish those new changes out to our database. Now, what this is doing for us is not a ton, meaning our application is not going to change how it works based upon those foreign key relationships. Those foreign key relationships do a couple of things for us, but the primary thing they do is they say, okay, these two things are related. And they allow us to more easily set up queries to do so. And there's some behind the scenes with SQL where it optimizes these connection points. Now there's also some things it does as far as when you try to delete something in a primary key table. So if I were to delete a product, but we have foreign key relationships in the sale detail and in the inventory, well, if I try to delete that product, it's going to invalidate those foreign keys. And so it can stop you from deleting that record, or it can prompt you, or it can cascade delete, meaning if you delete a product, it also deletes the inventory for that product, and it deletes all the sales for that product. Now, when it comes to databases, I almost always don't like to delete anything. I mean, deleting is really scary to me, because you can lose history. You can lose the understanding of why something happened, because all of a sudden half the records or carry it. And that's why I don't like the idea of fully deleting something. So I don't typically find huge benefits as far as those cascades, whether it's cascade delete or whether it's stopping me from deleting something. I don't typically see a whole lot of benefit from that, because I don't typically delete records out of a database. Okay, so we've done the publish. So that is our first check-in, our first thing we did. And really, at this point, typically what you do in a development process is you then go look at your changes and commit them. Now, normally I commit just at the end of a lesson, because that's our unit of work. But in this lesson, it's a little bit different. And I want to show how maybe a more normal flow would go, where you're doing multiple commits. And so here I would say, add foreign key relationships. Adds FK relationships on tables. Not a great message, but for the sake of this video, good enough. And I don't have to push it up. In fact, I won't push it up. I'll just let it sit here locally as an outgoing, because I'm working by myself. However, if you're working in a team environment, it might be a good idea to push it up so that if someone else wants to work on these tables, they don't have to do as much merging. Okay, so that is the first tweak to make to our system. The next tweak is if we look at our database, let's go I believe it's under here, under databases. Yeah, I think it's this one. I think this is our entity framework. Yep, this is our entity framework database. ASP.NET-security- and then a GUID. That's just one ugly name. Or maybe it's that one. Let's go look. We can look by going to our TRM Data Manager, which is our API. Go to Web Config. And looking here at, it's this one. It's the second one. So it's ASP.NET-TRM Data Manager dash, and then a date, looks like, .mdf. And that's just ugly. And initial catalog is the same. And it's not clean. Now, this is a testing database. This is a local database. And really, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect anything because once you go even to a dev server, you'll be replacing this connection string with whatever the dev server wants it to be. So it's not the end of the world. However, yes, it's something we should probably change. Also, we call it default connection, which is, that's fine. But maybe we want to change this to be something else like EF data. So for entity framework data. So how do we do that? So let's go ahead and change basically everything about this. So let's call this EF data instead of default connection, which is going to break things. It's not going to be able to find the database connection string. Next, let's change this to be EF data. And again, the initial catalog, EF data. So we've changed the database name, we've changed the file name, which notice the file name here, it's a local file, it's not actually a SQL server. And that's because it's using just an MDF file. So we name it the same name for the MDF file as we do for the initial catalog, which is the database itself. And that's a good best practice. It's kind of like naming your model the same. That's the bad example right there. Let me go to my models. How about that? So models. So if you look at the product model, if I open this up, there'll be a product model class. Okay, class called product model, and that's what we're doing here. The initial catalog is kind of like that class name, whereas this is the file name, just like product model.cs is the file name. So it kind of links those two together. So now I've renamed the database, I've renamed the connection string, and I've probably broken everything. In fact, yes, I have broken everything. So how do I fix it all? Well, first of all, in our models inside TRM Data Manager, which is our API, in the models folder, this is where Microsoft kind of irritates me a little bit. In order to make things seem smaller and cleaner, what they did is they put a whole bunch of models in one file. They violated their own rules. So under identity models, notice it's plural, it's got two different models. Account view models, it's got four models. And then account binding model, it's got 3, 4, 5, 6 models. So just know that they're all there. But in identity models, we can see down here for application DB context. Now this is what sets up a talk to the database. It says the application DB context base, and it passes in the path for the connection string. So if we look at this, it says name or connection string. So the name is the name of the connection string. So we call it EF data instead of default connection. Well, we just overwrite that with EF data. We could have also passed in the entire connection string, but that's not a good idea because then we can't change it at runtime. So just make sure you change it here. And we're almost done, but now we have to do our migration or our update. Now this gets a little tricky, but it should be that in app data, if we were to show all files, we'll see that there is our old MDF file, which we don't need anymore because the fact that we're going to use a new one, but we'll wait to delete it. Normally you delete that if you want to recreate it, but since we're creating a new file, an efdata.mdf instead, we shouldn't need to. So we should just need to go to Package Manager, Enable Migrations, and it should do a build. All right, and then we should be able to do a update database. So let's see how it runs. All right, so it's throwing an error here. It's saying unable to update the database to match the current model. I believe the reason why is because of this migrations folder, but I'm not positive. And it did create this new configuration.cs. I'm not a huge entity framework guy. In fact, I don't know a ton about it. I'm going to delete that just to be sure. And here's the other way you can go about it. This is kind of a cheat, but we're going to hit start. And we're going to see what our API tells us about entity framework. It should be that with code first, that it goes ahead and builds it for us. So if I were to go /swagger and go to auth, remember that this database should be empty when we go to create it. So even if I use my tim@imtimcorey.com and my password, it should be that it finds invalid grant. Okay, so it's saying, hey, I can't find it. It's not there. But if I go to account, I should be able to create an account. So I register. I click on example value, which is kind of cool. It brings it over. tim@imtimcorey.com. And I'll recreate my account in the new database, hopefully. And no authorization token. Try it out. And I got the no content 200. That seemed to work. So now, if I try this again with the same credentials, now I get my access token. So it seems to have built that database. And in fact, if we close this out, and if we come over to SQL Server Object Explorer, and we refresh our databases, we should see now EF data is here. And EF data has the tables that it needs, and it has, if we actually look at users, we should see that one record now for my account. So a little clunky there. I probably could have done it a little better, but now we have the entity framework database, the connection string renamed as EF data. We have a database renamed as efdata.mdf, and the file named as efdata.mdf, and the database named efdata. So it's a lot more clear now. We don't have default, which you're wondering, well, what is default? Is that the one we primarily use? Well, no, it actually wasn't. It was our authentication database. So that resolves the next item. So let's go back to our changes. And it was just a couple of changes, web config and I So that we don't have to bring the container or pass it around. We can just do IOC dot, and get is one of the key commands. So how easy was that, right? Now, normally in these things, we'd want to test, make sure everything worked, but in this case, I know it works, so I'm just going to commit this as well. So now we're going to replace container reference in shell view model. Replace container reference with the IOC reference instead. Okay, so now we have our next commit for our next fix. All right, so the next thing we're going to tackle is the for each loop in the sales view model. So in here we have a for each loop, and one of the questions that was asked was, hey, can you make this a little simpler? You have a for each with an if inside of it, and that's not terribly complex, but it can be probably made a little bit more simple or a little simplified. So let's try instead of doing a for each loop, let's comment this out. And let's see if we can do it with link. So instead of this for each, we can say cart dot where, because the first thing you want to do is say only the items that are taxable. So x arrow function x dot product dot is taxable. So only the items where they're taxable. That's going to return an IEnumerable that's filtered down to just the items that are taxable. Then we can say dot sum of x arrow function x dot product dot retail price times x dot quantity in cart times tax rate. And we can just say, okay, tax amount equals, and then we can even make this a little bit cleaner by saying, we put those in 3 lines. You can see, take the cart, over to a link statement. And we'll commit that. And now the final thing we're going to do is a little bit of a feature improvement. And we're not going to do it in both spots. We're just going to do it in one. But just to show we can, let's go to the sales view. And right now in the sales view for items, we have just a text box that says product name. Let's change this to actually have the price and the quantity in stock in this list. So we're going to cut this out right here. I'm going to put a stack panel with an orientation of vertical in its place. I'll paste in the text block again. And then I create a new stack panel with the orientation of horizontal. And then inside here, I'm going to have 2 text blocks. One will be the price, and then one will be the quantity. So we're going to say binding equals, and we need the price of this, which I don't know what that column is yet. So let's go to, this is the products. This is the products list. So let's look at products for sales view model. And that's right here, which we have product model. So we have our retail price. So let's grab retail price, go back to our XAML, and paste in the retail price. And then I'll copy and paste this again. And then I'll have, this will be the quantity. So we have the product model, and we have quantity in stock. So we'll have quantity in stock. Now it's getting a little ugly because of the fact that it's just numbers. So not ideal. So let's fix this up a little more. So let's go with a, let's go actually do another stack panel set. So let's Control X this. And yes, these can get nested pretty deeply if you want. And there's probably a better way of doing it, but this is going to be the way that I'm going to go about doing it. I'm going to paste in that text block, and I will bring in another text block that the text is going to be price, colon, and a space. And then I'll do my close out the box. It'll do the same exact thing here with text blocks, or our text block. We'll do a stack panel, and the orientation is horizontal. And then we'll paste in that text block here, and we'll paste in a similar text box that is the QTY. And then if you want to, and let's look at this. The default font size is 24. That's probably too big to have for these underneath items. Now, I believe I can do cascading here. So if I do font size here, maybe not. Okay, well then I'm going to apply font size in each spot. So font size here, let's make it 14. It's be a lot smaller, and that's okay. And we'll apply that to all of these here. And that way it's more of a subtext thing. So with that being done, let's just run this and make sure it works the way we intend it to. And this should give us a couple of pieces of information. The first one is make sure that this works. With my new login and password, which is the same as the old login and password. And sequence contains no elements for get by ID for that user control. Aha! And the reason why is because this ID right here does not match up if we come over here to our TRM data, go to tables, and go to user, and go to data. Remember that we created this and said that the ID is this right here. Well, that's not the same. So if we went to update this, we can now update that with our new value, and it should work from now on, but of course it's going to say internal server error. Let's do it again, and now it works. And hey, look at that. We've got a 10-inch skillet with a price of 18.7500. Not ideal, but at least it's showing us something, right? So what we need to do now is we need to change that over to show a $sign, but we're getting close to what we want to see. So now if we say 11 for skillets, we know why, because there's only 10 available. Now if I were to put 5 in the cart, that should update, and we'll have to go back and fix that. We're not going to do that in this video, but we've got another video coming up that will talk through some of these nested item issues that we have. So that'll be another video itself. But for now, we've got something that works. We're going to change this later as well to have that more feature-rich display like we have here. but let's at least change this price to be a valid price. So we can stop this and close this out. So I believe what we need to do here for the retail price is on our binding, that after we bind the name, the retail price, we're going to do the string format, and that string format is going to be the 0:C, which I believe the way we do this is like so. 0:C. It's been a while since I've done this. I think that's the way we do it. We're going to find out. So let's go ahead and start this again and make sure that my memory is correct, and laugh at me if it's not. All right. Hey, look at that. Tim actually made it work. So the retail price, it's a little small on your screen probably. And that's kind of intentional because we don't want to be the primary focus of this, but it says the price is $18.75. Now this is something you have to address if you want to have culture conversion, so that if it was, I believe it's based upon the current machine right now, so that if you were in Europe and your primary currency is euros, it would say euros instead of dollars. And that should be fine normally if you're working in country, but if you're working with multiple different currencies, that's something to work through. But for this case, I believe it should be fine. So we have our displays properly now with the correct number of decimal points, which is 2. And we have a little bit of space before we have quantity and see how many quantity of each item there is. Okay, so that's the big changes that I want to put in place. Let's go ahead and commit that last one, which is to add additional item info. Adds item quantity and price to the list view. Good enough? Go ahead and hit stage. And now let's go ahead, now that we have our multiple commits, we can push those commits out to GitHub so that the rest of our team, if we had the rest of our team, could work on it. Okay, so that's the bug fix, or the first take at refactoring. We still have more to go as we look at how we can address things like that hack in the cart. I want to address that in a separate video because it's a little bit more of an in-depth solution than just a quick fix. But that's something we need to address, and that will also fix that. When we took the 5 quantity and moved it into the cart, it should have reduced the items. They'll address that as well. So a couple more things like that. One of the suggestions that's come out is the idea of adding the a skin on this to make it look a little more professional, or maybe have like the material design skin or something like that. And I'm debating that. We might put that in. Let me know what you think. But this, I think, gives us a good handle on the quick things we need to do to refactor to make things a little better. I am Tim Corey.